Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, as always, joined with two great guests on today's episode as we talk about some Week 11 matchups and rankings. I've got Joe Dolan from Fantasy Points and Jordan Vanek from 33rd Team, and we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. One, if you had Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz on your team, how do you possibly pivot away from two top 5 tight ends? We're going to talk about Kadarius Toney and his possibility of being a top 15 wide receiver and so much more. If you've got any trade questions, start-sit questions, or anything else, drop them below in the YouTube comments and I will get to those as soon as I possibly can. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode of The Launchpad. Would you start Jaylen Warren this week? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Joe, go ahead and start us here. If you have Jaylen Warren, are you confident plugging him into your lineup after the usage that we saw last week?
Confident might be the wrong word, Dave. And hi, guys, by the way. Confident might be the wrong word with this Pittsburgh team, which is not a good offensive football team. But I just found it so ironic that it's the best Najee Harris has looked this year. And Jaylen Warren outscored him for fantasy. And it looks like it could be the early down plotter, third down kind of explosive guy type of role. Look, there are some really good players on bye this week. Miami has 2 startable running backs. Travis Etienne is on bye this week. Tampa Bay has 2 startable running backs. So we've got some good team on bye. It's such a cop-out to say, oh, this guy's a flex. When in a week like this, Jaylen Warren might need to be your RB2. So if I had Jaylen Warren, I think he is a completely defensible option this week. And I think they figured out potentially the right way to use him.
Yeah, and the other team on bye is the Seattle Seahawks. So you throw Kenneth Walker in the mix.
Oh, of course,
we're looking at 5 potential starters that are all on bye this week. Mm-hmm. So you start scraping that barrel, getting down there a little bit, and Jaylen Warren all of a sudden looks like a pretty strong start. Jordan, what are your thoughts on Jaylen Warren? Because he didn't look great last week, but like Joe alluded to, he saw more opportunities and he finished with more fantasy points than Najee Harris.
This Pittsburgh offense just scares me in all sorts of facets. I don't believe that they're going to be able to do it effectively against the Cincinnati Bengals, but if you're dealing with a ton of people on bye weeks, it's obviously you got to go with it. You don't want to try to chase someone else, but there are plenty of running back injuries to kind of monitor. I think the biggest one is definitely in Chicago right now with Tristan Ebner as a player that could, if you were able to snag him on your waivers, possibly start. And if he's starting and getting carries with Justin Fields, sign me up for that. But if you're desperate at the running back position, I'm starting Jaylen Warren. But if you're trying to start him as a flex, I think there are more receiver options that I would bank on trying to get that long touchdown.
Yeah, and that's it. You almost always want to put a receiver in the flex. So if your RB2 is looking a little bit bleak, I think we're all kind of in agreement that Jaylen Warren is a sneaky play this week. But I want to thank everybody now for tuning into episode 54 of The Launchpad, which can now be found on all Footballguys channels. Last week, well, 2 weeks ago, since I took last week off, 2 weeks ago, I was with Alfredo Brown and Matt Chester. We were looking at some Week 9 matchups. Today, I'm with Joe Dolan and Jordan Vanek as we look ahead at Week 11. You can find Joe over at Fantasy Points. You could also find him on the Ross Tucker pod. He's been a longtime member of the fantasy football industry, putting out some great content. And then Jordan Vanek, you can find him over at 33rd Team, highlighting a lot of their DFS stuff over there. But let's get back into this Cincinnati Bengals and Pittsburgh Steelers matchup that we started talking about a little bit. And I want to talk about George Pickens because he has been sort of a roller coaster, which you expect from a rookie wide receiver to have those boomer bust tendencies. But he gave us pretty much a donut last week. And Jordan, throwing this question to you for Week 11, what are you doing with George Pickens? Are you looking at him as a start or a sit?
I'm looking at him as a start, and the reason is because this Cincinnati secondary is kind of banged up. We've seen Chase Claypool now is gone in Chicago. Last week, the Steelers were winning majority of that game. They had no threat of the Saints being able to score some points. The Bengals in this one, I expect them to come out with a victory. I expect Joe Burrow to play really well. He played awful in their first matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, giving them some defensive touchdowns right away early in the game. But I expect the Bengals to be up, and I expect the Pittsburgh Steelers to be thrown from behind. So confidently, I'm starting George Pickens, but it has a lot to do with these bye weeks.
Yeah, and predicting game script it's a tricky game, but I think when you're looking at Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, it's not an exact science, but I think we expect Cincinnati to take an early lead here, so I don't hate that call. Joe, how are you looking at George Pickens this week? Are you starting or sitting him?
As somebody who had George Pickens over the receiving yards last week, I do somewhat tilt by the fact that he got a rushing touchdown. But no, for fantasy purposes, I like that they're putting him in a position to touch the football. And when we saw Chase Claypool getting a lot of those kind of manufactured touches, well, now Chase Claypool's gone, so they're going to give him to George Pickens. I think he's a completely defensible start. He's one of those guys who, when I'm getting questions on like Twitter or our subscriber Discord or something like that, where there's situations where he is an obvious start, and then there are situations where he's an obvious sit, just depending on what the roster looks like around him. I consider him more of a start-worthy guy, though, because I do think he is an explosive play waiting to happen. I just want Kenny Pickett to look slightly more comfortable. Kenny Pickett's numbers, I think, are a little worse than I've thought that he's looked, if that makes sense. Like, I think he's looked better than his production, than his metrics. Ultimately, you are your numbers in fantasy football. But I would like to see Kenny Pickett maybe pick it up a little bit. I think George Pickens, though, is a start for me against Cincinnati, who, again, does have that banged-up secondary.
Yeah, I just looked it up because it kind of shocked me as well. Pickett hasn't looked great, but he also hasn't looked terrible. But you see that 2-8 touchdown to interception ratio, and that's just absolutely abysmal. So it's tough to really, rely on any wide receivers in Pittsburgh. But like you said, they're manufacturing touches for George Pickens. So I agree with you, Joe. I think that he is a start this week. But let's look at the now wide receiver one on the other side of the ball, Cincinnati Bengals. Looking at T. Higgins here, and everybody thought that T. Higgins was just going to smash when Jamar Chase got injured, but in the games that he has played, he's averaging just 7 targets, 55 yards. So, Joe, is it crazy to think that Higgins might actually benefit from Jamar Chase? I mean, we're not benching him by any means, but is he not really that top 5 wide receiver we were hoping he'd be?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that's a completely defensible position. I mean, when you have a guy like Jamar Chase, he's going to command more attention. He's also going to command targets from the quarterback. But also, maybe the more attention gets a guy a big game or bigger games than he might produce outside of having a guy like Jamar Chase on the field. So the good news is, if you have Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, it looks like Chase might be back next week. That Pittsburgh secondary, though, is problematic. You look at the fact that Ahkello Witherspoon's dealing with a hamstring injury. They traded for William Jackson, had to put him on IR. Minkah Fitzpatrick has appendicitis. So this could be a really exploitable matchup this week. Of course, it all comes down to if the Bengals can protect Joe Burrow. They did not do that in week 1. Burrow was sacked 7 times by the Steelers. And of course, the Steelers got TJ Watt back last week. But if they can keep Burrow upright, I actually believe this to be a pretty big blow-up spot for T. Higgins, given the injuries the Steelers have back there.
Let's hope so. And we know T. Higgins can do it because as a rookie, he got red hot at the end of the season with no Jamar Chase when he was the wide receiver one there. It's very frustrating because we were hoping to get a few boom weeks here and just haven't seen it yet. So, Jordan, how are you feeling? Are you seeing anything exploitable in this Pittsburgh secondary that might set T. Higgins up for a boom week?
So for me, the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary has been extremely frustrating from a coverage perspective because against the Eagles, they decided we're going to man up, play cover 1. We're going to let these receivers work on the outside. A.J. Brown goes for 4 touchdowns. I played Miles Sanders that weekend. Then they go to Miami on Sunday night. I'm going towards Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. If you do that against them, it's just fireworks to begin with. They played 2 safeties back majority of the game and kind of tried to keep everything in front of them, which they did after that first start of Miami. And then they go back or a few weeks before that, they actually played Buffalo and let Josh Allen, get cover 1 with Diggs and Gabe Davis. They go monstrous games. Without Jamar Chase in this matchup, I'm intrigued to see what the Steelers do because in the first matchup, they were getting pressure with 4 and playing the 2 safeties back. And that prevented a lot of T. Higgins production before I think he left that game with an injury. If they decide to go cover 1, T. Higgins is probably going to go for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But if they go back to their week 1 matchup, this could be another dud week for T. Higgins, who he is the Robin to Jamar Chase being Batman. It's very apparent when they're both on the field, they're both explosive, and that's okay. Maybe T. Higgins isn't supposed to be the number 1 receiver we all hoped he would be.
Yeah, it would be nice to see that. And there's no real way to predict how the defense is going to look this week. Got to hope that there's something that they can get going there. But if they do end up, dropping back and trying to take away that big play, there could be some underneath opportunities. And that makes me think that Hayden Hurst could be a possible streamer this week, especially with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, tight end 3 and tight end 4, both presumed to miss, possibly the rest of the season, but at least this week. Evan Ingram's on by. There's a lot of people right now that are probably staring at their tight end slot and tilting a little bit over it. So, Jordan, do you think that there might be an opportunity for Hayden Hurst to be a reliable streamer this week?
Yes, especially if the Steelers try to go into this cover 2 type of scheme. The middle of the field is where you'll want to attack, and Hayden Hurst has shown the ability to kind of find these soft spots in zone coverage for Joe Burrow. So I'm leaning towards Hayden Hurst being obviously a startable option. Tight end position outside of the top guys is always a nightmare week in, week out. We started to see Cole Kmet do it, and now all of a sudden he's on the injury report. We obviously have seen Mark Andrews do it, and now he's on the injury report, or Ben Hurt. It's a tough position to get to for real fantasy production, but I think you can pencil in Hayden Hurst for at least 6-7 fantasy points in your league.
And he's giving you a pretty reliable floor week to week. So, Joe, I saw you nodding a little bit. How are you feeling about Hayden Hurst this week?
We got him at tight end 9 this week, and the funniest part is basically tight end 7 through like tight end 15 for me is just like, there's no way I'm batting above 50% on decide. Like if you were, those are such common questions. Like, oh, should I start Hayden Hurst or Tyler Higbee this week? No way I'm batting above 50% on those. Like Tyler Higbee was a glorified offensive tackle for 4 weeks after being a huge PPR option, and then all of a sudden he's back to being a huge PPR option last week. So it's hard for me to figure out. But we have Hurst at 9. There are 6 guys who I would clearly start ahead of Hayden Hurst this week. Those are Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, Hawkinson, Schultz, and Freiermuth. Those are the 6 I would clearly start ahead of him. And then you get into Kmet, Pitts, Higbee, Moreau, Knox, Dulcich, Everett. Some of these guys are dealing with injuries. Some of these guys are dealing with inconsistent roles. And I have Hurst right firmly in there. I don't think he's got the goose egg potential of like a Higbee or a Knox, but I also think he doesn't have the ceiling potential of like a Higbee or a Knox. So that's where I have Hayden Hurst this week.
So kind of a poor man's Zach Ertz. He doesn't have that huge ceiling, but he's going to give you a somewhat reliable floor. So I'm with you. I mean, it really is just throwing darts at a board. Once you get past those first few elite tight ends, you can kind of shuffle them all up. But I am advocating for Hayden Hurst as a strong start this week. Now, before we cover our next game, every single week we do our Sleeper Starts of the Week, sponsored by Sleeper. If you're not playing fantasy football on Sleeper by now, I don't know what you're doing, but get out from underneath that rock that you are living in. It is the best fantasy platform out there. They've got 22 new features that they rolled out this year to help make your fantasy football experience even better. Now, let's get into it, talking about our Sleeper Starts of the Week.
It's time for the Sleeper Start of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Jordan, go ahead and start us off here. Who is your start of the week?
If this player is able to get some practice reps in, I'm going with Wan'Dale Robinson. The Detroit Lions have allowed 7 players to get over 70 receiving yards from the slot specifically. Wan'Dale Robinson is getting a role increase week to week. And on top of it, against the Detroit Lions specific coverages, Wan'Dale Robinson gets targeted on over 30% of his routes and has a 30% target share with the Giants.
I mean, I loved Wan'Dale Robinson, what we saw those first couple of weeks when he returned from injury. I mean, he was just a target hog, and we haven't seen it quite as much over the last couple of weeks. But if there is ever a recipe for a bounce back, it is just playing against the Detroit Lions. It doesn't get much better than that. Joe, who is your start of the week?
My start of the week, let me almost piggyback off of Jordan. I'm going to go with the same team and the same position, but I'm going to go with Darius Slayton. Slayton, all of a sudden, out of necessity, might be legitimately good again. Like, he's rekindled the relationship with Daniel Jones. He scored double-digit fantasy points and topped 58 receiving yards in 4 out of his last 5 games. He had 3 for 95. Bizarre touchdown last week, to be sure, against the Texans, but a touchdown nonetheless. Kenny Golladay continues to prove that he's one of the biggest wastes of money we've seen in recent years. He dropped both of his targets last week. Slayton should continue to get most of the targets on the perimeter this week against the Lions. He runs the highest percentage of his routes on the defense's left side, where he'll draw the predominant coverage of Amani Oruwariye. Over the last 5 weeks, Oruwariye has surrendered 0.53 fantasy points per coverage snap. That is most among all cornerbacks.
Yeah, love that call out. And before, since one of you talked about Wan'Dale Robinson and one of you talked about Darius Slayton, and Joe, you mentioned it. Let's just go off on a little tangent here. What is happening with Kenny Golladay? I mean, I've never seen a player fall off this aggressively in such a short matter of time. Joe, can you give us any sort of insight on this situation?
Without getting into a player's head, I first and foremost, but I do believe, as I would be too, by the way, I do believe he is really happy to have a $72 million contract. Let's put it that way. And that was his goal. And you remember it was the COVID year where he was like practicing, and then I don't think he played after like week 6 with the Lions. He was practicing, and this could be the week. And then he never played again.
That he nursed for an entire season.
Yeah,
yep.
he's like, I'm not letting this ruin my free agency. In other ways, I almost wonder if he was a product of Matthew Stafford, contested balls, stuff like that. Just, I don't know if he was the type of guy who's going to age well with all the injuries. He got fat and happy on the contract. He can't stay on the field. His attitude is clearly not good. I mean, he's been benched. So I just think Kenny Golladay was just a guy who was probably never worth the money that he got. Was really happy he got it, and that was priority number 1. I'm never going to begrudge a guy for getting paid, but I don't begrudge the Giants fans for booing him either.
Yep. And I think that is probably it, that I think he was more of a product of Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford was just throwing YOLO balls to Calvin Johnson for his entire career. Calvin Johnson retires, and then he goes, I got another big guy that can get down the field. Let me throw the ball his way and see what can happen. So I think we're all on the same page here, though. This game against the Detroit Lions is going to be very exploitable. So whether it's Wan'Dale Robinson or Darius Slayton, both have immense upside this week, and I love both of those as the sleeper starts of the week. Now let's get back into it. Now I want to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs playing against the Los Angeles Chargers, which is probably the most star-studded matchup of the week. Is going to be a great primetime game to watch. Let's talk about Kadarius Toney because he got a little bit more involved last week. JuJu Smith-Schuster is nursing an injury, might be missing week 11. So how high is Toney's ceiling this week, Joe? Talk us through it a little bit. How are we feeling about Toney?
I think it's super high. And I think the ceiling, he's a ceiling and floor guy. All right. We've seen the floor. We've also seen the ceiling. We've seen what he did against the Cowboys last year. And now congratulations to Kadarius Toney. He no longer has just one good game played in the NFL. He now has 2. Obviously the Chiefs Andy Reid is clearly a coach who is willing to work with maybe guys other coaching staffs are not willing to work with. This is now 2 coaching staffs in New York who have decided, Kadarius Toney's not really worth our trouble. He's not part of the culture that we kind of want to build here. We heard the trade rumors dating back into the spring. And you know what? Brian Daboll's got the Giants at 7-2. Who am I to question the culture that he's building there? But we know Andy Reid and the Chiefs are a team that has built up its reputation, has been willing to take shots on players who other organizations might not have any necessity for, might not have the time to deal with. And with Mecole Hardman and JuJu Smith-Schuster almost certainly not going to play, didn't practice on Thursday. I think Kadarius Toney is basically a top 30 wide receiver option this week, if not more than that. And in this offense, he's already done more than Sky Moore did. And I was a Sky Moore guy this offseason. You just have to adjust. Juju's going to be out. I think Hardman's going to be out. Kadarius Toney, yeah. I mean, I think he's going to be unfortunately, this game's on Sunday night. But I think he would be very popular in DFS otherwise, especially, and Jordan, I'm sure you play full weekend slates and single game slates. I think he'll be very popular in those formats.
Yeah, Joe, I've got him as my wide receiver 26 this week. Wrote about him in my article as a player trending up. Talked about him in a video earlier today with Alfredo Brown as a potential trade target. I can't get enough of Kadarius Toney, and I'm sure you saw the quote that came out from Travis Kelce this morning saying, I don't know what the Giants were thinking letting this guy walk out of the room. I mean, yeah, we can't question Brian Daboll because the Giants are winning, but this seems like one of those mutually beneficial moves where the Chiefs got better, Kadarius Toney gets better, and the Giants are still winning games, so everybody's happy.
And by the way, Travis Kelce might have an eye for talent because I remember in Tyreek Hill's rookie year, which I think was either 15 or 16. I had him on Sirius. I had Travis Kelce on Sirius XM during training camp, and it was just like, all right, Travis, we're a fantasy football show. Give us your sleeper on the Kansas City Chiefs. And he fired off Tyreek Hill immediately. And he's just like, Tyreek Hill, this guy's explosive. I've never seen anything like this. Maybe some vibes there with Kadarius. So we know Toney's talented. There's no 2 ways about that. it was injuries, personal problems, whatever it was with the Giants. He's got the opportunity this week. Let's just ride it while we have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I don't think any wide receiver in the league has the long speed that Tyreek Hill does. But when you look at that jitterbug, that ability to break tackles and the lateral speed, Kadarius Toney is up there with Tyreek Hill. Like, he possesses that sort of explosiveness. And then we saw, Tyreek Hill vacated a spot that I think a lot of people have this misconception because early in his career, Tyreek Hill was just a downfield burner. But over the last couple of years, they started manufacturing short touches for him. They were getting him going in jet sweeps. I mean, they were doing whatever they could to get the ball in Tyreek Hill's hands, sort of a Deebo Samuel light role, if you will. And I think that that's exactly what they have envisioned for Kadarius Toney. So I've got him as a top 30 wide receiver as well this week. Joe, I'm glad to know that we are on the same page. Jordan, talk to us about Kadarius Toney. Are all three of us just in on Toney at this point?
I think you can go higher than top 30. I think you can go as high as top 15. I think Kadarius Toney has the chance to be the number one receiver outside of Travis Kelce being the main portion in this offense, and kind of similarly to what Tyreek Hill's usage was in Kansas City, and not necessarily from a long speed, like you said, of down the field, because teams don't let Mahomes throw it down the field. But that Titans game opened a lot of eyes for NFL people, where Vrabel went and played cover one, rush 4, got pressure with 4, manned up against the Chiefs. Not a single player could get open. Andy Reid knows that. Andy Reid knew that kind of was coming with the receiving core. So he was aggressive with going to get Kadarius Toney, because he knew for a Super Bowl run, they need someone who can win in man outside of Travis Kelce. And that's who he's going to be. And with Kadarius Toney, just from a scheme perspective, the way they're utilizing him, it's only going to get bigger and bigger. And come playoff time, we can really see him be the alpha in the receiving room and let JuJu play the secondary role, because the big thing with JuJu isn't necessarily was his talent. It's just the injuries he sustained took away from his athletic ability that we saw early on in his career. Still hasn't really shown up. I know the Bills game, he had a big one. The 49ers, those were missed tackles. It wasn't necessarily him breaking the tackles. Guys were just not wrapping up. So for me, I think Kadarius Toney is going to eventually be the number one receiver in the offense. And when teams try to double Kelce, Mahomes is going to look to Toney.
Yeah, love that call out. So glad to hear we are all in agreement on this one. Now that we've talked about the good with the Chiefs, let's talk about the bad. And of course, I'm talking about this backfield. Isiah Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon. Real simply put, Jordan, who is the running back that you want to roster in the Kansas City Chiefs, if any?
I don't even know if I would want to roster any of these running backs in a showdown slate, Dave. I'm going to be completely honest. This group is just, it's a nightmare. Isiah Pacheco has no vision. If the hole is there, yeah, he can kind of break off. But once someone gets his hands on it, he's not breaking a tackle. Like, this whole entire backfield doesn't really possess much talent. It feels like when I ever see Jerick McKinnon get on the field, he's the best one. Like, it feels like when McKinnon gets these manufactured touches on a screen, on a wheel, he just kind of gets a check down. Like, he at least can make a guy miss. He's not going to get it on 3rd and 1, and it's tough because Patrick Mahomes can't do QB sneaks. So they let their tight ends kind of do that for them, because Mahomes' freak accident a few years ago. I don't think we need to really go into the volume of the running backs. I think Pacheco would be the one that I would want to start the most, just because I feel like he'll get the most carries. And for whatever reason, he's technically, I guess, their goal line back. But overall, it's the first time that I don't want any part of one of the number one offenses, or one of the top offenses in the NFL at the running back position.
Yeah, which, I mean, really, we shouldn't have wanted anybody since Kareem Hunt, but Kareem Hunt was just such a freak as a rookie in Kansas City that we just keep chasing that dragon every single year, whether it's Damian Williams or LaShawn McCoy. Nobody ever works out in Kansas City, but here we are 3 years later, still trying to find it. Joe, I saw you kind of nodding in agreement with a lot of what Jordan said. Is that kind of where you're at? You don't want to roster any of these guys?
I don't. However, I'm going to make a prediction. And first and foremost, let me just put this out there. I don't necessarily want to roster them, but you still have a guy who could be the lead carry guy on a great offense, and a guy in Jerick McKinnon who's going to be a passing down back in a great offense. I'm almost never going to predict one of these guys to explode. But if you're stuck, you're like, well, at the very least, I got Jerick McKinnon. This is the highest totaled game on the slate. So I'm going to see if maybe he catches 5 dump offs the way he did last week, and I can put him in a flex spot. But I'm going to make a prediction. Like Jordan said, there's no vision for Isiah Pacheco. If the hole's not there, he's not hitting it. Here is the problem, though. There will be holes there this week because they're playing the Chargers run defense. They just put 2 more defensive tackles on IR. They didn't the Eagles put one on IR and they give up 3 yards of carry, and then they're out here signing half the defensive tackles who've ever played in the NFL. I don't know if you guys just saw, but they signed Ndamukong Suh now, and the Chargers didn't do that. I think Isiah Pacheco goes for 100 in this game.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, the Chargers are giving up the 3rd most points to opposing defenses, and not a perfect metric, but definitely something to pay attention to. They are behind only the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Texans as their run defense. So do like the Isiah Pacheco call out. I think the last thing I want to talk about, though, in this game is Justin Herbert, who a lot of people were touting as a top 3 quarterback to draft this offseason. At worst, you didn't have him below QB6 in your preseason rankings, and now I can't believe I'm even asking this, but Joe, do you maybe bench Justin Herbert this week?
Well, it depends on who you've got. And like for instance, like 5 weeks ago, I wasn't benching Justin Herbert for Justin Fields, but I am now. I feel like I'm benching him for Dak Prescott. I'm benching him for obviously Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow. I think you can make an argument. You can bench him for Kirk Cousins, who played well despite being pressured often, against the Bills last week. I have a nickname for Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator. I call him Sideways Joe because he loves to throw. You got Justin Herbert, but he loves to throw the ball to the sidelines, and of course the receiving position has been an issue for them. Though, if Kennan Allen and Mike Williams, if for some reason or somehow we were to be able to get confirmation that those guys are going to play early on Sunday morning, I'd probably move Herbert up a couple of spots in my rankings. Currently got him at QB 10.
Yep, that's exactly where I've got him, and kind of looking at it the same way, because I think last week was the first time since his rib injury where he's looked like himself. His throwing motion had slowed down a little bit. He was afraid to use his legs. He was shying away from contact. Herbert appears to be past the injury. Now it's just a matter of whether Mike Williams and Kennan Allen can return, but even if they're both active, I got to be honest, I'm still a little bit nervous. You're looking at a high ankle sprain for Mike Williams, looking at a hamstring for a 30-year-old Kennan Allen. Those are injuries that linger. I don't know if we're going to see these guys at 100% in their first week back, let alone for the rest of the season. So, it's looking pretty bleak right now for the Chargers. Jordan, kind of same question to you, though. I guess the question is, if you're benching him, of course it matters, who else you have. So is he top 10, top 12? Where do you kind of have him this week?
Well, with Kennan Allen, I'm not too worried about his hamstring for the fact that he was already kind of supposed to be coming back, and then he had his setback, and basically he came out and said, I'm not playing if I'm not 100%. I don't want to risk refurthering this injury. What's the point? And from what I've seen from practice clips of Kennan Allen running some ladder drills and routes and stuff, the speed looks there. Like, he looks like he's comfortable. He doesn't look like he has any sort of real lingering issues from obviously a practice standpoint in the videos. But if Mike Williams and Kennan Allen are playing, I'm very confident in Justin Herbert putting up a big game. With Kennan Allen out of the lineup, like, Justin Herbert used to be one of the best quarterbacks against zone coverage. Last year was close to league leader in the NFL. He's one of the worst quarterbacks against zone this year. He has nobody who can actually find a soft spot, sit there, get into that area of the field. And Kennan Allen does that for him tremendously. And then Mike Will back allows them to win against man. Kansas City doesn't have the biggest of corners. So if Mike Will is back, he doesn't necessarily need to run routes on a lot of these guys. All he has to do is be bigger, stronger, faster. And that's what he was in their first matchup. With Kennan Allen, you're just getting a guy who's going to be able to move the chains for him and sustain drives. You give Brandon Staley every reason to go for it on 4th and 1.
So let me throw one other question out there then. If you are, in your fantasy league right now, getting ready for the playoffs, and right now you're, riding that quarterback carousel where you're going between Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins and Daniel Jones and whoever else you could possibly stream, are you looking at Justin Herbert maybe as a buy low guy that you should be targeting before your trade deadline?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. See both of you nodding here. For any of the audio listeners that are checking this out on podcast, we are in agreement. All 3 of us have Justin Herbert.
Yeah, we're bobblehead dolls right now. Which is
Well, let's go ahead and switch gears. Talking about the Chicago Bears at the Atlanta Falcons. The Bears have been red hot. It's kind of crazy to think that they have scored 29 more in 4 straight games. Justin Fields has just been a god among men when he's playing on the field, but I don't know if it's sustainable or not. So, Joe, start us off here. Who do you have ranked ahead of Justin Fields in your quarterback rankings this week?
Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, if this game somehow is not played in a driving snowstorm or is moved to Toronto or Detroit.
It was already moved to Detroit.
It was?
Yep.
Yep.
Announced it right before we started recording.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I missed.
Now we got
that,
Josh Allen going from 6 feet of snow to an indoor dome.
All right,
I
so
think
then those are the two I have in front of them right now.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too, Joe. Somehow every single player that you have called out their ranking, you and I are in lockstep. That's exactly what my rankings are this week. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Fields. So got no pushback there whatsoever. Jordan, what about you? How are you feeling about Justin Fields?
Not sure I necessarily put. It's tough with Josh Allen's elbow injury. I know he looked good last week. He scares me. He scares me with that elbow and just any given play. It doesn't quite look like he wants to push the ball downfield as much. I know he was able to do it in the big moment, but a little scary. I feel like a game against Cleveland, if they get a little bit of a lead, they might be more handoff centric towards Devin Singletary, who had a pretty good game against the Vikings last weekend. But as far as Justin Fields goes, I don't think you could ever really rank him outside the top 5 for the rest of the season. I think he's ahead of Lamar Jackson and arguably ahead of Jalen Hurts, depending on the news on A.J. Brown and his little injury and stuff like that, just because of the fact that Justin Fields is in the perfect spot. Like, this is the rushing quarterback. We always talk about Konami code, and just the way the Bears are using him is incredible. And Tristan Ebner might be a starting running back on Sunday, so expecting him to have plenty of opportunities in the run game. He does it when he's scrambling. Teams have tried spying him. It doesn't really matter right now. He's learned to tuck it and run quicker. He's not trying to do as much down the field anymore, and that just makes for a great fantasy quarterback. And if Lamar Jackson doesn't have Rashad Bateman for the rest of the year, I don't want to rank Lamar over Justin Fields going forward.
Yeah, kind of crazy that we have moved that quickly on Justin Fields, but you can't ignore what you're seeing. The guy's putting up 40 points almost every single week through the tough part of his schedule, and now his schedule opens up and he's got some easy matchups, so completely on board with that one. Now let's talk about both tight ends in this game, Kyle Pitts and Cole Kmet. Who do we prefer in this matchup? Again, Joe, I know they fall into your tight end 7 through tight end 15 bucket where you can shuffle these guys up in a Yahtzee cup and throw them out, but who do you prefer? You got to pick one, Kyle Pitts or Cole Kmet this week.
I'm picking Cole Kmet, even though statistically I have Kyle Pitts ranked higher. But like, sometimes if you just look at the straight number breakdown, you're just like you need to. There's some cognitive dissonance there. I don't know if either of you guys have played video. Do you guys play video games? Did you play video games at some point in your life?
Growing up, yeah.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Metal Gear Solid series?
I am.
Yeah.
Okay. So Metal Gear Solid 2. I broke this down on Ross Tucker as well. Sorry if I'm telling the same story. For those of you who can't get enough of me, aka Mom. So in Metal Gear Solid 2, there is a character called Fortune, and Fortune is both blessed and tortured by the fact that she cannot be killed in battle. Like, if you shoot a bazooka at her, it's a dud. If you shoot bullets at her, they go right around her. Kyle Pitts is Fortune right now because according to Fantasy Points data, our data charting service, just 61% of his targets have been catchable. That is not just last among tight ends, it's last among all players. All players. So, like, you throw the ball directly at Kyle Pitts, and it's going to go sideways just the way it goes around Fortune in Metal Gear Solid 2. It is horrible. I mean, you guys watched that game on Thursday night. Mariota did a couple of things that made me literally sit on my couch and laugh. I'm like,
you're talking about throwing the ball from flat on his back?
Yeah. It's just, I don't understand what it is because last year he couldn't get in the end zone. I mean, if Kyle Pitts scored 6 touchdowns last year, we're talking about an all-time great rookie tight end season because he had over 1,000 yards receiving, but he had just 1. This year, he can't even get the ball thrown to him in an accurate way. I mean, the average catch rate for a tight end is 70%. Kyle Pitts has 61% catchable targets. Like, that is just horrendous, guys.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is he's caught some of these uncatchable targets too.
Exactly.
Like, he's terribly thrown balls he's adjusting to and making something happen. So yeah, I think I'm with you as well. And the other thing is right now when they get near the red zone, it seems like Justin Fields has 2 thoughts in mind. Either I'm going to run it in or I'm going to throw it to Cole Kmet. So I think that, if we're talking about the improbability of Kyle Pitts scoring touchdowns, Cole Kmet's been red hot with 5 in the last 3 weeks. So same question to you, Jordan. Kyle Pitts or Cole Kmet this week?
It's Cole Kmet. I mean, look, he scored 5 touchdowns, and I don't think Kyle Pitts has 3 touchdowns in his career. I guess he does. I know he does in the United States. That's for sure, because it took him a while to score in the United States. But in terms of Kyle Pitts, as Joe alluded to here, Kyle Pitts is still one of the best tight ends in the game of football. This is just who Marcus Mariota is. Kyle Pitts is not going to get a ton of separation, and Marcus Mariota will not throw it to you unless you are absolutely wide open. This isn't necessarily an Arthur Smith situation. Arthur Smith is a very run-first centric guy, but he's also doing that because that is what his quarterback is. I don't know why they haven't just gone to Ritter. I mean, at this point in the season, just see what he is so you can go to decide what you're going to do next year. If you're losing a ton of games, you're just putting your spot for a better quarterback. So for me, it's Cole Kmet until going forward. And Kyle Pitts is just a guy, you know, I saw a tweet from Daigle today that was, don't worry, guys. The best advice I have for you is Kyle Pitts can see your team get a championship from the bench.
Yep, and that's what you got to do. Bench him at this point. Screaming buy in Dynasty, but I don't think there's any hope for the remainder of the 2022 season. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this matchup, and you talked about it a little bit, Jordan, Arthur Smith loves to run the ball. And with the Bears essentially giving up every single piece on defense, I mean, Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, Roquan Smith, they're moving everybody off the defensive side of the ball. Suddenly they have a terrible defense that is really easy to run on. So looking at Cordarrelle Patterson, Tyler Algier, and Caleb Huntley, how are you ranking those three this week?
Cordarrelle Patterson, I have to believe he's the starting running back. I know that the touches this past Thursday against Carolina went ugly. That game was just really ugly in general. But Cordarrelle Patterson is, to me, the number one in that backfield, and I still kind of hold him that. I do believe Huntley and Algier will get work. I don't know how much, depending on how the game script, I mean, not even the game script, just how much they have the ball, because both of these teams, I believe, are going to play slow. I know the Bears have picked up pace in recent weeks, but Atlanta is just going to slow everything down and take so much time off the clock. Against this Bears defense, you guys with Matt Eberflus was the Colts defensive coordinator for years. Before they got DeForest Buckner, they were awful against the run. We are watching a team that doesn't have the meat up front to be able to defend the run. They obviously got rid of Roquan, who was their best tackler. You can start running backs against the Bears. I think this is a spot where you can even start the backup running backs of Atlanta over the Chiefs starting running backs in Kansas City.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I copped out ranking these guys this week. I have all three of them outside of my top 24 and inside my top 36 because the opportunity is going to be there for any of them to have a big game, but I don't have any confidence in starting any of them. Joe, how are you ranking these guys? And I mean, are you putting like any vote of confidence in any of them this week?
Vote of confidence, no. The closest one is to Patterson. And I just think Caleb Huntley's run better than Algier this year. I just think he's looked better than him, so I have him ranked number 2. And maybe Algier's the guy who gets the carries this week, and then it makes me look stupid. But no, I think it's Patterson, Huntley, and then Algier.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am as well. Huntley has looked great, like not even like slightly better than Algier. He has looked really, really good. And I understand Cordarrelle Patterson's going to get the meat of the touches, but Huntley deserves more because he has looked phenomenal this year. Now let's switch, talk about another game, and I want to talk about the Los Angeles Rams at the New Orleans Saints. And of course, the first thing we are going to talk about is the absence of Cooper Kupp and how that could potentially affect the landscape of the wide receivers here. I put out a poll on Twitter the other day that got a lot of very funny responses saying, who is the wide receiver to roster and the Rams going forward? Allen Robinson, Ben Skoranek. I threw Van Jefferson in there as well, but let's also throw Tyler Higbee into the conversation. Joe, start us off here. Who do you expect out of these 4 pass catchers to lead the team in targets this week?
I'm going to guess Higbee because I feel like Stafford is going to need somebody to replace just like the easy targets. But am I sure of that? Absolutely not. And here's the reason why. The Rams just put 2 offensive linemen on IR. Alaric Jackson, who was their backup right tackle who moved to right guard, then moved to left tackle when Noteboom went out. And then Chandler Brewer, the right guard who came in for Alaric Jackson after Alaric Jackson moved to left tackle, he's on IR with a knee injury. They're down to their 4th string right guard, their 3rd string right tackle. And then the question becomes, knowing that, as I mentioned earlier, Tyler Higbee's been used as a glorified offensive tackle at points in the last month. I can see Higbee catching 9 passes. I can see him catching 0 in this game. So Higbee, I think, is the best bet here. But let's not forget the fact that maybe there's no good bets here. They were last in the NFL in yards per play with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp gained 34% of their yards from scrimmage. 1 out of every 3 yards gained by the Rams. And honestly, I'm a little surprised it's not more. 1 out of every 3 yards they gained this year was gained by Cooper Kupp. This offense is going to be apocalyptically bad. It's so bad.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I mean, I've never seen a team win a Super Bowl and fall off this hard the very next year. So, Jordan, same question to you. I mean, who do you expect? And Joe, I think you said it best. I am going to guess that it's Tyler Higbee, but I don't think there's anything that we can really draw a strong conclusion from. I think we're all kind of guessing with this one.
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely guessing with this one, but I'm going to go on a different side of things, and I'm going to take Van Jefferson. And the reason is because when Van Jefferson came out at Florida, he was an older prospect, so everybody hated him for dynasty. And then he only got utilized as a deep the shot for the Rams when they had Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. But he was a bigger style slot receiver that wins on the intermediate routes across the field. I don't necessarily think he's going to get the quote unquote Cooper Kupp role, but I am intrigued to kind of see what style they use him in when they've never not had him in a lineup without Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I think he's the best fit to be a good offense, or I guess somewhat productive offense with that specific role and running the specific route tree of Cooper Kupp. Is he going to be him? Absolutely not. But I know Allen Robinson can't get it done. I know what Ben Skowronek is just as a player. He's a grinder. He does a lot of things, but there's nothing down the field that he can kind of get to. Higbee will likely lead this team in targets. He's the safest bet, but I'm willing to take a chance on Van Jefferson, who profiled to take over this role. And then all of a sudden they gave Cooper Kupp the contract and still kept Robert Woods. So he never got the chance to play it up until this week.
Yeah, and we're just providing the audience with absolutely nothing valuable here, because I'm going to go with Allen Robinson and say they got 46 million reasons to throw the ball to Allen Robinson. They don't have anybody on the team that can separate right now. So I think Matthew Stafford throws to the guy who is best built for making contested catches, because nobody is going to be open. So again, we are all guessing here. This is a disgusting situation. I don't think that any of these guys belong in your lineup until we kind of see what this offense looks like without Cooper Kupp. Now let's also talk about their backfield, which is equally as disgusting. We've already talked about the Falcons backfield. We've talked about the Chiefs backfield. Now let's talk a little bit about the Rams, because Kyren Williams, Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers, they're all getting touches. So how do we rank these guys this week? Jordan, start us off. Who do you prefer out of the bunch?
I don't want to rank them, Dave. I don't think I would put that if we had a 8-game
You're just
slate.
broken, bloodied, and bruised after talking about the Rams for like 2 minutes here.
I think if you had an 8-game slate this weekend, I wouldn't rank one of them in my top 20. It's a nightmare. Like, I don't want to start any of these guys. If I had to guess which one I'm most interested in, Kyren Williams, because I haven't seen it, I guess. Like I've seen him catch the ball out of the backfield in college at Notre Dame. He was cool then. It's all I really got from an analysis standpoint, because Cam Akers isn't the same player. The team and him obviously don't get along. Darrell Henderson isn't trusted, and even when he performs, it's 40 yards. So give me Kyren Williams, who could be the best receiving back in this offense.
Yeah, and that's probably just the unknown makes him a little bit more alluring, but you don't feel especially good about Kyren Williams either. Joe, is that where you're at? Is Kyren Williams the guy that you want here? I mean, historically
Henderson.
bad RAS score, coming off a high ankle sprain. I mean, there's not a lot to get excited about with Kyren Williams either.
No, I think he's the kind of guy who profiles as like a James White type of player, and in a great offense, that player's got a lot of value. This is not a great offense. I think Henderson's probably the guy I want. Cam Akers, by the way, has been stuffed on 56.5% of his runs this year. I mean, that is just that's the percentage of runs that have gained 1 or fewer yards. I mean, that is just absurd. The offensive line is clearly a problem. They think Cam Akers is a problem. They both are probably a problem. That's just 45.6% for Darrell Henderson. Henderson's the guy I would play if I needed to, but I don't think anybody could have anticipated that this offense would be half this bad.
So, Joe, let's do another rankings check to see how close we are on this player, because I don't even know if you rank this deep, but I just checked in Cam Akers. I have as my RB 63 this week. I'm guessing that he probably falls somewhere 59. So, again, in lockstep on another player.
Yeah,
I think what we're saying with that ranking is don't even think about starting Cam Akers anywhere this week. The other thing I want to talk about in this game, though, are the New Orleans Saints. I mean, Chris Olave looked like he could have been the wide receiver one of this rookie class, was looking phenomenal. And then all of a sudden, Jarvis Landry comes back, and we haven't really been seeing many startable weeks from Chris Olave. So, Joe, start us off with this question. Are there any wide receivers for the Saints that you are starting this week?
Well, Olave and maybe Jarvis Landry. Landry had an interception go off his hands. My question then becomes, what is Jameis Winston doing wrong? And Dennis Allen comes out and says, well, he's not 100%, but why is he active on game day if you're just going to sit there and let Andy Dalton just throw interception? Like, if Andy Dalton wasn't throwing interceptions, that's one thing. And you're like, all right, Andy Dalton, he's taking care of the ball. It's not exciting, but he's throwing picks. He should have thrown more last week. Jarvis Landry, maybe if I'm desperate here, but it's Olave or bust, really, I would think.
Yeah. Jordan, are you kind of feeling the same way?
Yeah, no, definitely feeling the same way. I feel like it's really funny that we can say this guy's playing over this guy because he's not 100%, but if this guy gets hurt, this guy's playing. So I don't understand it. I don't know how much the Eagles are paying the Saints to tank, but the Eagles are probably going to have a top 5 pick this year with the way that the Saints are running things.
So if for some reason Jameis Winston is activated and they say that he's starting this week, I know I would give a pretty substantial boost to Chris Olave, probably move him up about 5 or 7 spots in my rankings. Is that kind of what you guys would do as well?
Absolutely.
Do you see? Yeah. So Chris Olave, much better with Jameis Winston than he is with Andy Dalton. Well, fellas, we could have covered this whole slate of games. I had a ton of fun talking ball with both of you today, but unfortunately our time has come to an end. Before we log off here though, Joe, now is the chance to plug everything you're working on. Let people know where they can find you on social media, where they can find all the fantasy points content, what you got coming out every single week, the Ross Tucker Show, all the good stuff. The floor is yours.
I think you just plugged it all for me. No, FG_Dolan on Twitter. You can catch me on Sundays on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, doing the game day show with Paul Kelly, who is just the pro of pros. You can catch me on our YouTube channel, Fantasy Points. Search for Fantasy Points Daily Lineup, and that'll be my morning show that I do. A quick 8 to 10 minutes every morning checking in on the top headlines in fantasy football. And I'm always blabbing on Twitter at FG_Dolan. So you can find me there. Oh, yeah. I should also probably, butter my own bread and say fantasypoints.com.
Thank you.
Go there.
If you didn't plug that, I was going to. But thanks for getting all that in, Joe. Jordan, same to you. The floor is yours. I know you're over at 33rd Team, but you also got your stuff that you're putting out on Twitter and all that. So let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at Jordan Vanek DFS on Twitter. Every Tuesday, I record a show with Greg Jennings talking 3 different receiver duos. That gets posted sometime later on Tuesday every single week. And one of my favorite things to do on Saturdays, I do a Cover 5 show where we cover 5 games from a DFS aspect, try to bring in the coverage data and certain things that I'm working on there. I do Thursday night showdown articles, Sunday night and Monday night, and the main slate GPP. All the DFS content you could find at the 33rdteam.com, and check out The Edge, which is one of the cool tools that we have for free to check out all the coverage data that I'm looking at.
Yeah, Jordan, one of the hardest working guys in the business. In case you were wondering, yes, it is that Greg Jennings that he hosts a show with every single week. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, but most importantly, be sure to follow Football Guys at Football Guys. And if you have not already, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/Football Guys so you can check out all of our full-length shows, our short videos, and all of the other video content that we have coming to you from our Football Guys staff. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode of The Launchpad, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in. As always, be sure to give us a thumbs up on the video. That's going to help us find some other big audiences so we can expand our reach here at Football Guys. Subscribe at youtube.com/Football Guys if you have not already. And thank you so much for checking out this week's episode.